Good evening and welcome back to a chilly night in the shop. So I'm in the process of building a lathe stand, and I needed this for my mini lathe that's sitting in the back, and it's going to go over here where my sander and a couple of these other items are. But I'll show that. It's going to be in an upcoming video. Just kind of an overview, kind of like I did my wood cart. It's not going to be a bye-bye or a step-by-step build video, but one of the things that did catch my eye that I wanted to share more with you guys is I wanted to build this stand and using traditional hand tool woodworking, something that I'm trying to get more into. And I figured what better thing to use as a piece of shop furniture and learn these techniques, craft my skill, than a piece of furniture. So I want to go over a little bit and kind of talk about how I'm going to build this, or how I'm doing my hand tool layouts in joinery. And I'm going, in this case, I'm going to use Mortise and Tenon joinery on the legs, the stretchers, and the aprons. So you guys stay tuned and I'll show you how I did it. All right, now the very first thing that I did is not necessary for this, but I'm just going to share with you what was a great help for me. So this stand already kind of had a general size that I wanted the stand to be. And then I put all the pieces together, in which these pieces is Southern Yellow Pine, starting out with 2x6s. And I basically trimmed everything down to about 3.5 inches. And that made all my basic components. 4 legs, 4 sets of aprons, and 4 sets of stretchers. When it's all glued up, this is one side that I've made and put together already. So we got everything laid out, and one thing I found that was invaluable so far with this project is using blue painter's tape and just your basic writing utensil. And I'll use this as an example since it's already put together. So every spot that I knew where my tenon was going to go has blue painter's tape on it. So every piece that's got a tenon has blue painter's tape. Now along with this, I also made some corresponding marks on this blue tape. The example here, we have a G, I don't know if you can see it or not, there's a letter G, a letter H, a letter E, and a letter F. Corresponding with this is the same letter H, G, E, and F, so on and so forth, along with a corresponding set of arrows. Now, that way, when I go to cut my mortises, or cut my tenons and cut my mortises, they will always match up, no matter what. I know which piece goes to which, because these mortises, or tenons, and mortises, with the exception of one thing I'll talk about, is going to be all cut by hand. So they're going to be their own unique fingerprint. So I want to make sure that everything pairs up correctly with the correct tenon into its corresponding mortise. That was the first step, is getting everything laid out. Once I took everything apart, then I can get my measurements down. Now, it's going to be slightly longer because obviously we don't have the tenons and the mortises cut in the pieces yet on the initial. Everything's going to be a little bit longer, but that gives me an idea of how long I need these stretchers and the aprons to be. The next step will be doing the layout for the tenons, and we'll talk about that now. All right, the next step that we want to do is doing your layouts of your tenons. So I use the 3-piece method, if you want to call it that, the method of 3s to get my tenon size. And I don't recall where exactly some YouTube channel I was watching. I watched a lot of YouTube before I started doing this just to kind of get an idea. And the thought process and idea behind this 3 was, one was to take your width of your piece, split it in half, and then basically break it down into thirds. And that distance, that third, that's how big your tenon's going to be. In this case, it come out to be 5/8 of an inch. So I decided that my tenon length was going to be 5/8 of an inch. And the shoulder, top and bottom shoulders, are also 5/8 of an inch. And I did the same thing here on the side, split it into thirds, and that gives me a shoulder of 3/8 of an inch on each side of this tenon. So that's your essential, your tenon size. Now once you get that figured out, now you have your blue tape, you need some sort of marking device. Now you can go with, this is the reason one of these things comes in handy is to have two combination squares like I have here. You can take one and just already set at 5/8 of an inch, mark it down, make your mark, use your other one, which I kind of use as just a straight edge, and you can either mark it with a pencil. I find this Sharpie to have been very effective. Some sort of sharp marking tool, just like if you're going to be cutting dovetails, a marking knife such as this. But I recently picked up this marking gauge, and first time I've used one, and I absolutely love it. So I can set it at my depth, in this case 5/8 of an inch, and scribe me a mark. And I go all the way around this board at a constant same distance. And the same goes across the top. My 5/8 upper and lower shoulders. And then all I got to do is come back and set it at 3/8 of an inch. And quickly scribe a 3/8 of an inch side shoulder to give me my tenon. And that's the easy layout. Now I would come back with my permanent marker, which I found to be useful, and just a straight edge, and kind of highlight and scribe the marks all in the tenon, especially on the end grain, make it kind of difficult to see. Once all your marks are made all the way around, now we can get into cutting. Now this is going to be a rough length. It's not going to be your final length. That kind of come in, I'll show you that a little bit later, how I come in a final length. But now you want to cut it. One thing is where I ran into the first problem that I found of something that I don't currently have and I need, and that is a good vise. I have kind of this jankety vise on the side, doesn't work very well. A good Moxon vise will be my next project to hold this in place. Now we're initially cutting down through the end grain, cutting your shoulders. You're going to want a good sharp rip saw. Problem number 2 I ran in. I don't have a good dovetail saw or a good solid rip saw. I really wanted to use this saw. I like the feel of it. I like the weight of it. But this is not a rip saw. This is not a saw good for cutting into end grain. It cuts very well. A cross cut, across the grain is a cross cut, cutting off the tenons. Not so well cutting across. Luckily, I have my Suzanne saw. I fell more in love with this saw as I used it for this. I've got this very sharp rip tooth pattern on one side and a very sharp cross tooth pattern on the other side. So I made it very multi-purpose. And it cut very quickly through this end grain material. Almost too quick. Only problem with this saw, because it's flexible, I had to really hold on to the end of it and kind of keep it steady, and just felt kind of awkward in my hand, but it worked very well. And then I could come back on the ends, flip it over, and then cut through on the shoulders and cut the shoulders off until you roughly end up with something like this. It's going to be very rough, not very even unless you're really good. In my case, I'm not that good when it comes to cutting. And then that led us into the next layout that we need. So I cut essentially 2 of these on the stretchers and 2 aprons. And that just kind of gave me a general idea. And then I went back into that 3-dimensional kind of layout, and that got my final measurements. And the way I would do this would be lay out my leg the way I want it. I slid one all the way in, and then I took my other leg such as this, and this way I can now measure the distance across here. So if I knew how much more I need to take off of each of these tenons here to bring it in shorter. Probably a little more difficult, probably sure there's better ways of doing that, but that's the way that worked out best for me. Once I got my tenons rough cut, now we need to clean them up and make them useful. Now that we've got our tenons cut and we've got our rough size, we know our distances, now it's time to make this a usable tenon with shoulders. This is where a good set of chisels, good sharp set of chisels, comes in invaluable. In my case, I have these really nice Norex chisels that I picked up recently. They're very sharp and they worked out great. So, and also I used this really good combination square. So the way I did this was I found a generally flat reference surface. Once I found that flat reference surface, that was my surface I referenced on. And I made a check mark to signify that this surface is flat and even, both this way and into the tenon itself. It's a flat reference surface. Now I started working off that surface. Now to get it flat, I moved the next one over. Again, checked it, saw my high spots. In this case, I can use my chisels and to basically pare pieces off of it and get it down. Tool number 3 that I need. A good shoulder plane would have been coming great for this. I don't have, but this worked real well. It's kind of soothing and peaceful. Just keep chiseling away at it. When you get to the other side, the one side was fairly reasonable to work with, get it square, but now you know it's a little bit longer than you need. So if you come to the other side, there's some pieces that may be a little bit longer. I found a good coping saw. Worked well for just taking off a little bit thicker, more than you really want to be taking off with a chisel. And that allowed you to kind of cut down through the wood, and then you can kind of chisel it away as you come back. That worked really well. The next thing you want to do is square up the actual tenon itself, and that just repeated the same process with your chisel. Clean those up. Also, I used a small sanding block with some higher grit sandpaper, or excuse me, lower grit sandpaper, to kind of smooth everything out a little bit better, and a good carver's mallet to kind of chop through some of this. Now, I found that cutting through, especially this ingrain material, really took a beating on your chisel edges. So you want to make sure they stay sharp. After, say, I got done with these 4, then I stopped. I went back and resharpened all my chisels again before I proceeded on to cut the aprons. But just keep in mind, need a very good sharp chisel for this. But that's how the tenons all got cut and got smoothed out. It's a really nice, peaceful process. By no means are they the greatest looking tenons in the world. I'm not the Rob Cosmans of the world. Don't intend to be. But that turned out to look really nice for what I needed. Then it was on to cutting the mortises, and that's what we'll do now. Now, when we got into cutting the mortises, there was some tricks in here that I had to do a little bit differently than when I cut the tenons. And this is the only area where I ended up using a mechanical means somewhat. And that was my drill press with a 1/2 inch Forstner bit to kind of chew away at the mortise a little bit more. I only have, you really need a mortising chisel for this job. I only have this small number 6 Nurex, which is equivalent to about 1/4 inch. And when cutting these larger mortises, it was just a little too extra painstaking for me. I got a little impatient, but I did use this for the corners to kind of cut into the corners and square everything up that way. But we're talking about laying out first. So we know that my 5/8 of an inch shoulder, so we can set that up. Again, these are where these numbers that I made corresponding that I talked about earlier really comes in handy, because you can get this right where you want it. Let me see if I can find the one. You really get the numbers here where you want them. Line it up so you reference it. Get your end top shoulder. Make your mark. Same goes for the inside. Always double check it, because they're not going to be the same. Get your inside shoulder. Mark it, and then for the outside shoulder, I just come across the top with it. And again, you're going to need to do some. You're going to do some finessing. This is not going to happen on the first try. So you don't have to worry too much about it. You can always go smaller. Just make sure you don't go much, larger than it needs to be. Make your mark, and then when we come for the end mark, I get everything lined up where I wanted it, and then made a mark, basically eyeballing it where I wanted it down here. You could do the same thing that you did on the sides and go across the top to get your bottom mark. But that got you a rough dimensional area for that your mortise is going to be. Took it over the drill press, popped me about 3 holes in there with my Forstner bit, as straight as possible. Then it's back to clean up, just like how we made our tenons. It's back to clean up with a good sharp pair of chisels. This mortise and chisel come in really nice for getting squared off in the edges. But you just chisel away at it, go back, test fit it. I would usually chisel a general amount out, kind of get it test fitted. Then I would come back with a chisel and chisel the tenon. Try to fit it, go back and forth until I got the spot where it just slipped right in. Trying to look here. Here we go. Just want to make sure I got one here to show. Slip right in the hole, just like so. Fits right in there. That's my spot. Actually, I got that one backwards. There we go. B and B. Fits right in there. Initially, I just put the A in, and that's really where it comes in handy with the marks, so you know exactly where it goes. A little lesson learned there. But that's really it. That's how I cut my tenons and my mortises. Again, by no means do I claim to be an expert. These are probably not the prettiest ones you've ever seen, but for me, it worked out fine. Again, my glue up side that I've already made, I'm getting ready to glue up the other sides. And then these will start making my stretchers here, or my aprons. So in this case, I want an eye. And then I'll just get it good and seated in place here. And then that'll be it. That'll be our stand. So hopefully you guys see the next video that I put out will be it all completed. I won't go through the whole build process, but I just wanted to share how I did in mortise and tenons. Hope you guys have a great night. Thanks for watching.